It might not have been much of a game, but it's still the game. But there will be no game on Saturday. But what games lie ahead for the Buckeyes? We will carve it up here with these three: Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove, and of course, Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. This is our Ohio State Buckeyes live show every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern time, typically. So lock it in. Subscribe right here to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. Gentlemen, minus Kevin, how we doing?
Doing good. It was good to see Kevin for like 3 seconds there.
Yeah, he just wanted the introduction. That's all he wanted. That was it. And see ya.
He just showed up so he didn't get fined.
Had enough of this. All right. Well, let's get to the more pertinent, up-to-date news, and then we'll talk about that Michigan thing later. But what's on everybody's radar right now is what's next for Ohio State. There's a Big Ten championship game to be played somewhere in less than 2 weeks in Indianapolis. Well, that's where it's going to be played, but involving whom we don't know officially. But Steve, we'll start with you in regards to what do you think is going to play out. What's being reported? It appears as though the Buckeyes are going to be the beneficiary of Big Ten rules changes.
Yes, excuse me there. It seems like common sense is going to prevail here, which is a good thing. As Kevin just told us on our internal chat, Indiana and Purdue are canceling their game this week. They both paused football activities yesterday. And it's open to debate whether Indiana would be able to play next week, even if they wanted to at this point. So to me, this just makes common sense. If what's being reported is true, that Ohio State's going to be approved with 5 games played instead of the requisite 6 to go on to the Big Ten championship game. And to me, this is common sense. First of all, they had 2 games canceled on them by other schools, Maryland and Michigan. And so they had 2 games they lost that were kind of outside of their purview, beyond their control. So that was the first thing. The second thing is they beat the next best team, Indiana, head-to-head on the field. I know it was just a 7-point win, but it was a win nonetheless. And third of all, had Ohio State played a game this week against Michigan, Maryland, whoever it may have been, and lost the game, they still would have qualified for the championship game. So in this instance, not playing a game or losing a game, who cares? I mean, it really doesn't matter. Well, I think you take all that into account, and it's really nothing, I don't think, about the hopes for the playoff or anything like that, because people are recognizing that the winner of the Iowa-Wisconsin game, who Ohio State probably would have played if they didn't go to the playoff, was going to be a ranked team anyway, requisite with Northwestern somewhere in the teens. And, it looks the same on your dossier. The only thing missing is that check mark for winning the conference championship, but they've taken non-champions before. Certainly Alabama got in as a non-champion and won the national championship. Ohio State got in as a non-champion in 2016. And so they've taken non-champions before. That's really not that big a deal to the committee. So to me, this makes perfect sense. And to me, it has nothing to do with the playoff, and just an unfortunate set of circumstances all the way around. You feel bad for Indiana on one hand, that they're not going to have that chance to play for their first Big Ten championships in 1967. That's a long time. And yet at the same time, I think you're putting the best team from the division into the championship.
I mean, what happens if Indiana isn't able to play next week? Ohio State's the only team that's been able to make it back after 1 week. So if Ohio State wasn't able to go and Indiana wasn't able to go and Maryland doesn't have enough games, are we sending the winner of the famous land-grant trophy of Penn State and Michigan State? Are we sending that winner to the championship? Does Michigan get? I mean, we're really getting way down the list at this point, and it becomes the theater of the absurd. So, I understand, and I've seen the outrage on social media that rules don't seem to matter, but This isn't like some rule that's been around from the founding of the Big Ten Conference, or even since the conference went to 14 teams. This is a 2020 rule, and I'm out at 2020. Things need to change. We've seen scheduling adjustments in the ACC. The people who have lauded the conference for making all these wise and smart decisions seem to be the ones that want to pile on the Big Ten. No, you don't like law and order. You hate Ohio State. So, let's just call it what it is. It's absolute hypocrisy what's going on in terms of social. I talk about the 6-game rule the way I talk about targeting. It was well-intentioned and is poorly executed. And I don't necessarily have an answer on how to make it right. So, it is what it is. I think that the conference ADs have reportedly made the right decision or whatnot, but there's certainly been a lot of missteps along the way, and why should we expect anything to be different as we're here in the 11th hour?
That rule was put in to keep a 3-0 team from, like a 3-0 Maryland team from going to the Big Ten championship game over a 6-1 Ohio State or Michigan, something like that. That's what the rule was for. It wasn't to keep the best team out when they've beaten the second best team. Although, don't get me wrong, I would love to see Penn State and Michigan play for it. Although then if Penn State and Michigan State rather, but Michigan State would need Rutgers to lose, because if Michigan State were to win and Rutgers would win, then I believe it would be Rutgers in the Big Ten East as the Big Ten East division champs over Indiana, who could not play, and Ohio State, who didn't play enough, and then you've got Rutgers in the Big Ten championship game before Michigan, which I don't know how to feel here. I think that this would be something pretty fun to watch. But then as people are watching it, they would all be like, how did you let Rutgers into your Big Ten championship game? And as I tweeted yesterday or today, national columnists have one column written for if the Big Ten steps in and changes the rule. And they will then, if the Big Ten doesn't, then they will write a column scathing about how the Big Ten didn't change their rule. So whatever the Big Ten does, people are going to complain about it. But especially if it favors Ohio State, they're definitely going to complain about it. And this isn't news today. I talked to somebody at Ohio State a week ago tomorrow, and they're like, because I asked them, could you move Ohio State and Michigan to the Big Ten championship week, since Ohio State's not going to be in the game because they won't have enough games? And I was told, no, Ohio State's going to be in the championship game. Don't worry about it. And so this has been like the ADs, Barry Alvarez talked about it last week. This has been understood that it's going to happen, and you're not going to punish the conference because of teams being overly cautious with COVID during a pandemic. And so that's it. As Steve said, as Kevin said, this makes all the sense in the world. It just upsets some people on Twitter. And you know what? If that's the worst thing that happens, I'm pretty okay with that.
I agree with Kevin in regards to, it makes total sense that if you're going into this crazy season and you're going to foresee all these cancellations, that you would start with, okay, if we're going to have a championship game, we need to have a standard in regards to how many games are played. That makes total sense to start with that thought and that guideline. But they obviously didn't think it through. They did not think it through. And maybe it was just, there were just so many stipulations that even if they thought it through, they thought, we can't make rules and guidelines for all these various scenarios. So we'll just leave it for what it is. And if we have to get there and make a difficult decision that's going to look bad or is going to cause some criticism, so be it. This is what it is. And we'll make the logical decision, which it is a logical decision. It is the right decision. The team that earned it on the field is going to be in Indianapolis representing the East.
Yeah. I think that when you have two schools that have canceled beyond your means, you had no control over those situations. Yes, Ohio State did cancel against Illinois, and with good reason. There was an outbreak in the Ohio State team, as we saw this past week. they played without a lot of guys who would ordinarily be starters. And I think because it was so new when it happened, with all the tests on Wednesday of that week and Friday of that week, that they didn't want to risk what would have happened had they, gotten on a plane, gone to a hotel, played Illinois, come in contact with people. They just didn't want to take those risks because the infections were so, coming on at such an alarming rate in such a short period of time, that they just didn't want to take the risk. And they did the best thing they could possibly do for the health and safety of everybody involved. So that's why they didn't play last week. And people are still like, well, they should have played Illinois. There was a former player on Channel 6 on their Football Fever saying, these players only get so many chances to play. I really think they should have played the game. And, it's great. It's the United States of football. It's the earth of football. The world of football is all that matters. That's not the case. There's more going on in our society right now than just college football and playing these silly games. So I think you have to take that into account. And I think that's what Ohio State did. And for them to be penalized, and I'm not, again, casting aspersions at Maryland or Michigan. I think they handled their situations with integrity, just as I think Ohio State handled its situation with integrity. And it's just an unfortunate byproduct of this season that Ohio State didn't get to play those two games. But I think they deserve the spot in Indianapolis. And I think that, there's just so much to it. And again, I feel bad for Indiana. They've had a great year. And I hope for them to be ranked 12th in this week's standings, I think the committee is taking into account the injury to Michael Penix and the idea that they may not be a top 10 team going forward. But their body of work and what they've done matches up with just about anybody, above them, with the exception of the unbeaten teams. So for them to have a twice-beaten Georgia or a twice-beaten Oklahoma ahead of them doesn't make any sense to me. Iowa State, maybe. There's 3 2-loss teams ahead of Indiana, who only has 1 loss. Georgia is one that I continue to they haven't beaten a team that's currently ranked in the top 25, and their 2 losses, they were double-digit losses. They got trounced by Alabama and Florida, 2 very good teams, obviously, but
their recruiting ranking, Steve, is really good, though, every year.
Yeah, I mean, last night I'm watching The Drive on Big Ten, and Dave Rebson, Bruce Feldman was breaking it down, and he had just kind of a snide comment about the committee's affinity for Georgia. And Bruce Feldman, they go back to the 2-shot from a 1-shot of Feldman, and Rever is just like doubled over laughing like this, doesn't know that he's on camera. That's how much he was laughing about it. It's like a weekly gag for them. But a couple anomalies. I think Cincinnati got some short shrift here, although they haven't been able to get on the field in recent weeks, and that has kind of hurt. They've been stalled at 8-0 for what seems like 4 weeks now. So they are finally going to get to play Tulsa next week, and hopefully earn a New Year's 6 spot. I think Coastal Carolina, if they end up undefeated, deserves to be in the New Year's 6, and I definitely believe Indiana, if they play next week and win, should be in the New Year's 6 as well. So, enough of these retreads. Get some fresh blood into these major bowls, and let's see what they have to offer is kind of my thought.
Yeah, David Greenshield and John Sarian, you guys are right on the mark. Our show would not be canceled today. We are much tougher than the team up north. Absolutely.
Anybody's tougher than the team up north. Good criminy.
Rutgers couldn't withstand the 3 overtimes, though, so let's not raise them to quite that standard. But they're getting there. They're getting there. Let's get into the college football playoff rankings. We'll get there. We'll get there because I've got all sorts of issues with those, as I typically do. All right, so the incentive to play a game for Ohio State this week has been tempered by this change in the rule to usher them into a Big Ten championship game. Do we still think that there's a possibility? Kevin has reported or passed along a report that Indiana-Purdue's been canceled. Of course, people were looking forward to possibly Ohio State and Indiana playing a rematch, but this is a cancellation based on Indiana's COVID testing.
And Purdue's. Both
Both of them. Okay. So, Kevin, we'll start with you. Do you think there's any incentive or going to be any push by either the conference or Ohio State to play this week?
I think you want to play. I think you want to be playing your best football in December. I mean, I think you want to play. Ohio State is playing like every other week, and we know that they have a game, knock on wood, next week against Northwestern, provided nothing goes crazy there. But you don't have a month then to prepare for Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame, whoever it may be. And Ohio State is still trying to fix some things, still trying to get some things right. And playing, 3 out of 6 weeks or whatever isn't necessarily going to get it done. So I think there is an incentive to get there and to play it. And, I don't think that there's really an opponent on the Big Ten docket anywhere that they could play that's going to suddenly leapfrog them up to like number 2 in the rankings. So it's not necessarily that there's a rankings push or you're trying to, hopefully select who you're going to play or not play or where you're going to play or any of those types of things. I think it's more of an internal thing because Ohio State could sit there and run goods versus goods down 23, 20, however many players they'd be down after positive tests and contact tracing. But you're just still not going to get the same look as going against somebody. So I know Ohio State certainly has tried to explore a lot of different avenues in terms of finding an opponent this week. And Ohio State also has run into the same issue that Nebraska did, where the conference is completely unyielding on non-conference opponents. I know Ohio University was approached. I know numbers were talked about. I know the conference said no. So, we'll see. But, I haven't completely closed the door on the chance that I'm going to be covering a game this weekend, but I'm not exactly laying out my Sunday's finest either in preparation.
Yeah, that's where I am. I think Ohio State is still going to spend the rest of the day. Gene Smith will be on the phone trying to do what he can, but this isn't a thing where Ohio State just calls up Maryland and says, we're playing you, because Maryland would have to agree. And the Big Ten is asking around, and who would want to play Ohio State on 3 days' notice other than an out-of-conference team that will get paid for it? And so that's part of the issue here. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful, but I've been, my entire attitude is let's be hopeful this entire year, and because there's no reason to be doubtful because there's going to be enough bad news along the way. Let's at least hope for some good news and maybe boost our spirits a little bit. But yeah, I assume I'll be home watching other teams play this weekend, and then next week be in Indianapolis with watching a Big Ten championship game. But it is unfortunate because you've seen the ACC just strong arm teams and say, this is what we're doing. The Big Ten not doing that to, just for instance, saying, Rutgers, you've already played 7 games this year. Just take a week off. Maryland, you're going to come to Ohio State and play the Buckeyes. These are the two noobs who I don't even think they're full share members yet, or maybe they just are, but they should be as appreciative as heck to be in the Big Ten. And if the Big Ten says, you know what, we need one of you guys, Maryland, we need you to go to the Big Ten, or we need you to go to Ohio State, they should be like, okay, what bus do you want us to get on, sir? And we will be there. And instead, now, once you join the Big Ten, you become you have the same power as everybody else, which means if you want to drag your feet, you go right on ahead, and nobody else can basically pull you along.
I do want to get into the college football playoff rankings. Steve dove into it to a certain extent, and when Steve goes for it, then we just let him go. But I want to get back to it here. And I can't believe that we're going to let like 45 or 50 minutes expire before we actually address not playing Michigan, but that's the world we live in. Got to move on to the next thing. So the college football playoff rankings. Yeah, Iowa State is number 7. Indiana's number 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember
Indiana's
17-point loss to Ball State. I remember that. What a joke.
Exactly. Which could be much like, Iowa State 17-point loss to Louisiana. And the inconsistencies have gone week to week in this, and I know it's a difficult process, a difficult thing to do. But from the beginning of these rankings, Iowa State at one point was 10 spots higher than an Oklahoma State team. So it's not necessarily that I think that they're favoring conferences other than the SEC, but Iowa State was 10 slots ahead of an Oklahoma State team where they had the same record, and Oklahoma State beat them head to head. Did not have the 17-point loss against Louisiana, but had a good non-conference win against Tulsa. And if you looked at their schedules, they were almost identical because they play in the Big 12 and they're playing all conference games except for the one game. And it's like 10 spots. What's that? They're all over the place. With Northwest, it's just, yeah, I can't even. I'll just give that one example because I could continue, Kevin.
Yeah, I sort of lightly watched it because I didn't expect to see any change in the top 6, and we didn't. And everything else that kind of happens is par for the course. And once again, it goes to show that these football minds either outthink themselves or don't think enough about these situations. Oklahoma at 11 still kind of bothers me at this point. I just think I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of teams, and I'm looking at the rankings. That's what I'm looking at right now. That just things don't make a lot of sense to me in terms of what it is that they value, what they don't value. I think they value things for teams out of certain conferences that they don't value for teams out of other conferences. I don't know. I just think it's a mess, and we just need to get to the 20th when the final rankings come out. We see the Final Four. I think we have a pretty good idea of what they're going to largely look like at that point, barring some crazy upsets. And, you know, the good news is the national semifinals are January 1st, 2021. And that'll be a new year, at least in terms of what it says on the calendar. And maybe we can start things off on a little bit of a better foot.
And Steve, will cut you loose, but I didn't have so much an issue with the top 4, Ohio State staying at 4, even though they're an undefeated team behind a one-loss team. It was a great loss or whatever, an understandable loss in South Bend or whatever. It was more the rhetoric of the conversation with the committee chair it was like 80% Ohio State. Is Ohio State playing enough games? What about Ohio State? Just this laser focus on questioning Ohio State's resume.
Yeah, I have to say in their defense, it is a complete apples to oranges comparison when you talk about a team that's played 9 or 10 games against a team that's only played 5 or 6. One team's only played half as many games. And I understand that. I get that. I think that we all entered this season from the beginning when the Big Ten finally relented and said, okay, we're going to play. I was of the mind that the college football world was like, thankfully, great. Now everybody's here and we can crown a true universal, all 5 Power 5 conferences involved national champion. And everyone was happy about that. And going into it with both eyes open down the field, knowing that it was going to be imperfect, much as 2020 has been completely imperfect year. This is an imperfect solution to the season. You know, I didn't get the sense back in September and October that they were going to hold the number of games you played against you. You know, I've always been an advocate and a thought, you know, people have talked about Notre Dame is never in a conference. Well, they haven't been up until this year. So their season usually ends after game 12, whereas everybody else gets that extra data point, you know, to make it 13 games. And I have never subscribed to that theory because this is what I believe and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the schedules of the top 6 or 7 teams and I'm going to lay them out and I'm going to assign the college football playoff ranking to every opponent. Then I'm going to look at Jeff Sagarin or whoever from 1 to 100 and assign a numerical value to everybody else after that. And I could pretty much tell you without looking that when this thing is all said and done and Ohio State's played one more ranked team at the end of this thing next week, that Ohio State's going to have played 2 ranked teams Alabama's going to have played 2 or 3 ranked teams. Clemson's have played 2 or 3, 4 ranked teams, whatever. It's going to be very comparable. And when you get to the bottom of Ohio State's list at number 6, 70, 75, 80, whatever those other teams are, those are going to be the similar numbers that you're going to see from Alabama's opponents from 5 down to 11. 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. Those games mean nothing. Those games mean nothing. I want the teams ranked on the top 6 or 7 opponents that they played. Anything below that was just a personal appearance down at the mall signing autographs is all that was. That meant nothing. And Ohio State did not have beaten Maryland by 5 touchdowns or Michigan by 5 touchdowns or Illinois by 5 touchdowns. Doesn't mean anything. They would have been left right alongside games 8, 9, and 10 from Alabama. Meaningless. So rank the teams based on how they did against the best 6 or 7 teams on their schedule. Give me a comparable on that. I don't need to know that you beat Wofford in week 2. I don't need to know that. I don't care that you beat Charleston Southern in the tune-up game back on September the 8th. I don't need to know that. I don't care. It was immaterial. It doesn't factor into my thought on the relative worth of these teams. So that's my soapbox on that.
Before Tony goes, to your point, Steve, I hate the way the strength of schedule works, because let's say you've played 2 games and somebody else has played 2 games. If you're a good team, you don't care if you played team number 80 or team number 120. It's about the same deal. If you're Ohio State, big deal. But the strength of schedule works out that if you play the number 1 team in the country and you play the number 130 team in the country, you played a 65th ranked schedule. Well, if you play number 65 and number 66, you've played a number 60. It's the same. No, it's not the same thing if you played Alabama and Akron versus playing like, UAB and Louisiana. Yeah.
I give them credit. I give the ones at the top some credit. Clemson will have played Notre Dame twice, and North Carolina, who's pretty good. And, beyond that, I don't know. I guess they played Miami, who's top 10. So there's 4 pretty good games. I give them credit. We didn't think their schedule was worth a crap, and it turned out, thankfully to them, Miami, North Carolina beat up on pretty much everybody else that they played. And so those games look good for them. Alabama, I don't have their schedule in front of me. Georgia, my whipping boy, my God, they snuck freaking Missouri in there at number 24 to prop up the SEC or whatever this week. And I'm just like, like, are you serious? I rank the teams every week in my column. I do 25 ranked teams and like 6 or 7 more that I'm considering. The name Missouri has never once come up in my thoughts. Not one time. And the freaking committee put them in at 24. Are you kidding?
They do it every year.
They do
it every year. They throw a team in at 25 just to justify some sort of moves. It's
Colorado State last year. They bumped them in at 25 because Alabama had played them back 8 weeks earlier.
Missouri's got 5. Any win's a good win, but they've got 5 wins against bad teams. They haven't beaten a team with a winning record, and they've got a loss to a 2-win Tennessee team by 4 scores.
Yeah.
All right, Tom.
That's like Maryland. I'll stop talking and let somebody else speak. But a few weeks ago, Maryland was 2-1, and the loss was like a 30-point loss to Northwestern. And somebody in the coaches poll had given them votes, like Mike Loxley and whoever Mike Loxley's best friends are in coaching had somehow put Maryland at like 25 on their ballot. They didn't deserve to be 25 on anybody's ballot more than the man in the moon. So that's my thought.
But what the committee does is just so shameless. 5-3, Missouri is now 25. But Mark, you mentioned Georgia having beaten no top 25 teams. When on the CFP call last night with the committee with Gary Barta, he was asked, why didn't Indiana move up after having a good win with a backup quarterback? And he said, well, Indiana has no wins over top 25 teams, and all of their wins are against teams that aren't over 500. But Georgia, with 2 losses and no top 25 wins, they can't budge them out of that top 10. And it's so standard, it's so predictable, it's very tiresome because it happens every year. Georgia for some reason. And then the other thing I want to go off on is Reese Davis last night. Now, I know everybody knows Reese Davis, host of the College Football Playoff Ranking Show. That, as you mentioned, Mark, that show was so much focused on Ohio State. And at one point, Reese Davis talking about Ohio State, if they don't play this week and they make it in as a 6-0 team, you can't keep giving Ohio State everything. You can't give Ohio State everything. And then he says if Florida beats Alabama and if Clemson beats Notre Dame, then it should be Clemson, Alabama, Florida, Notre Dame. Like those Alabama and Notre Dame should be in the playoffs for losing. And so it's like, who are you giving everything to? Are you giving everything to an Ohio State team that is undefeated and won its way in? Or are you giving everything to Alabama, who loses and makes the playoffs, and Notre Dame, who loses and then makes the playoffs? Who exactly are you giving everything to? Because Ohio State has not played as many games as everybody else, but I still am totally against losing your way in. And I can't stand the attitude of you're giving Ohio State everything. And then he also mentions, and remember what Ohio State did in 2017 and 2018, with a full regular season of losing to Iowa and Purdue. What does that have to do with anything? And if you're going to bring up 2017 and 2018, why don't you bring up Notre Dame and their 2017 and 2018? They had blowouts both of those years. One of those blowouts to Clemson in the playoffs. 1 year, 2 blowouts in their regular season, and it's tiresome the way the attitude of, I don't understand giving Ohio State everything when Ohio State is trying to find games to play, is doing what they can, is not losing its way in. Nobody is saying if Ohio State loses, they should be in. And yet if Notre Dame loses and if Alabama loses, they should stay in. Because why? Because your preconceived notion is that these are the best teams. And why should that change? We all know that Alabama is the best, and losses do not count for Alabama. We know this, but they should count for Notre Dame because Notre Dame loses every year, and it is expected. And if it happens in the playoffs again, you're like, well, of course, we should have seen this coming. It's like when Oklahoma is in the playoffs, and then it's like, well, who are the idiots that put Oklahoma in the playoffs when we knew what was going to happen?
Well, they need to sit there. I mean, obviously, under that scenario, it's 2 ACC teams, and it's weird calling Notre Dame an ACC team, and 2 SEC teams. The other 3 conferences would say, screw it. We're out of here. We're done. We're breaking up the band. I quit. Because it's the same crap every single time. And it's funny that the 4-letter network has, its hooks in the SEC and the ACC networks, and those are the conferences that they seem to like to prop up. And I'm sorry that I took my tinfoil hat off before I got on the air here, but it sure seems like a level of malfeasance that's going on there. A lot of agenda-driven stuff, and I'm sick of it. I really am sick of it. And there is part of me that almost hopes that Armageddon happens. It forces the CFP to show its true colors, and we can break up this flawed system, because right now it's a farce. It is an absolute farce. We could just pick for 4 teams before we even start the season, or at least the 4 teams that ESPN and the CFP want to have the candidacy for, and it's evidenced by Georgia still really not going anywhere. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a situation on 538, Nate Silver's thing, where if 4 or 5 things happen, Georgia's probably the 1 seed, for Christ's sake. So, I'm done with it.
I'm self-employed now, Kevin. You're good to go.
A couple months ago, I wouldn't have gone off as far on that path as I did.
One of the things, because we were on the college football call last night, and I swear everybody on the Ohio State beat got called on except for me. And what I wanted to ask is, how do you make sure you're not punishing the programs who are taking the COVID pandemic more seriously than others? How do you make sure you're not punishing an Ohio State for being cautious during a pandemic? And I would like to hear the answer, because there's no real good answer other than, well, we can't punish them, and so they're in the playoffs, basically. Because if you hold them out, you are punishing them. And yes, it is difficult to tell who's better when you see one team playing 6 games and another team playing 10 games. But when you compare Texas A&M and Ohio State, you shouldn't have that much trouble. And if you're seeing, and I still think that you should not lose your conference championship game and go to the playoffs. I know the college football playoffs, they don't like to have rules. They don't like to put in their own rules. For me, if I'm college football czar, that's one of them. Until this is an 8-team playoff, you should not be able to lose your way in. And then it just becomes, it's an invitational. It's already an invitational where it's 2 or 3 teams and 1 or 2 teams get in, make their way into the playoffs. But I just, if you can lose your way in, I'm with Kevin. Just let's see 2 ACC teams, 2 SEC teams go in there and see what happens.
So you set me up for my next question, because I was going to ask all of you. It's conventional thought that Ohio State wins out. They're in, no questions. They're at number 4. How do they get trumped by a team that's lower in the rankings if Ohio State goes and wins? Hopefully Northwestern can hold serve against Illinois. The way the Wildcats play football, I have great respect for them, but we saw what happened in Michigan State, and it didn't surprise me, because once they arrived at that 3-game stretch undefeated at 5-0, I clearly said they're going to lose one of these 3 games. It's just Northwestern. So anyway, they already got that out of the way. Hopefully they don't show up with a 5-2 record against Ohio State. They can hold serve, keep their whatever they are, 14 or 15 ranking, and so it's a decent win for the Buckeyes. But how does Ohio State not get into the playoffs, winning the conference, checking that off, finishing undefeated, beating a ranked team in the process? But do you guys have your reservations about the ACC and the SEC shutting everyone else out if, as Kevin put it, Florida beats Alabama, Notre Dame, or Clemson beats Notre Dame, and we've got this this gridlock between those 2 conferences, and they shove them into the first 4? How likely is that?
That's a tough dilemma right there. Again, you're talking about apples and oranges, and I guess if you had to deconstruct each team's resume, I I agree in principle with what Tony was saying, that, okay, if you lose your last game, this conference championship, that maybe you don't deserve to be in the playoff. Alabama did get away with that the one year. Didn't they lose to Georgia and then came back and beat them in the playoff? Maybe the championship game, I guess. I don't like absolutes, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Every season is an animal unto itself, with different teams, different number of unbeaten teams, different number of one-loss teams, different teams that had goofy breaks, like Trevor Lawrence missing games because of COVID. But if I had to deconstruct the resumes of Florida, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Clemson, the odd man out to me is Notre Dame, because you kind of poke a hole in their best win, being Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. I think Florida lost on the road to Texas A&M, who is a top 10 team. And it was a close game. It was a good game, as I recall. I don't know. I guess it's the nature of how these teams might lose next week. If one of them loses by 3 touchdowns, then I think you have to call it into tremendous question. I was doing a radio show this morning, and we were asked about, I think Anthony Schlegel on 97.1 asked me, does Ohio State need to win big over Northwestern and have style points? And I said, well, go back to 2014. You had TCU and Baylor who weren't playing because they didn't have a championship game. And Ohio State needed to have an impressive showing, and did. They won 59-0 over Wisconsin, and that put them in. Fast forward 3 years, Wisconsin was 12-0 and undefeated. And you'd think, well, just a 3-2 win over a 12-0 team would put you in. And I remember talking to Jared Smalley on Channel 4 before the game, and I said, no, they need to play well, because there are teams nipping at their heels, and they didn't. JT Barrett turned it over 3 times, and they won on criteria, 27-21. like a wrestling match that's gone 8 minutes, and they look to see who had the most takedowns. I mean, that how bad it was. And to me, next week, Ohio State would help their cause to go out and just blow Northwestern out. And, we'll see if that's possible or not. It really wasn't 2 or 3 years ago when they played them. It was a close game for a while. And then the cream rose to the top in the fourth quarter. I think they won by 17 finally, but it'd probably be about the same type game, I would guess.
And I think 45-24. Does that sound?
Yeah, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
About as exciting as watching paint dry. But, Ohio State had a couple big plays in that game. The deep ball to Terry McLaurin, the Indianapolis native, that was kind of cool for him to catch that pass at Lucas Oil Stadium where he grew up, in his hometown. But there wasn't a lot of excitement surrounding that game. And poor Northwestern, it was like Stockholm syndrome for those people. They had like 5,000 people out of 65,000. They had this little purple covenant of people over in the corner. When they get a first down, you'd hear a distant roar off in the distance. And then they'd shut up for the next 20 minutes, and that was that.
We got 284 on the line. We appreciate everybody jumping on here to talk Ohio State football with us. Leave any comments or questions in the chat. We've got about 20 more minutes or so. And also want to let you know that this is possible based on your contributions, based on us getting a sponsorship. So if you've got sponsorship ideas, contact me at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. MarkRogersTV at Gmail if you've got sponsor ideas or suggestions there. All right. Michigan didn't get played. If this were 1985, 95, pick your year in the past, this would have been the end of the world, the end of civilization. In today's social media, hyper college football playoff focus, it's more like, that's too bad. Okay, who's Ohio State? Who can they play this week? What about the Big Ten championship? What about the playoff? Not even the Big Ten. Even the Big Ten championship's just kind of like, okay, well, who's the opponent going to be versus who would they play if they didn't make the Big Ten championship? And does that look better? Sacred cows like the Michigan game and the Big Ten championship are kind of like, well, does it get us to the end goal? If not, then big deal. Where is the sentimentality, Tony, in all this?
Millennials killed it all. It's sad. It is disappointing that at least there was a little bit of grieving, but like you said, it's social media, so it's fleeting. And then eventually it's, well, what does this mean for the Big Ten championship game? Now we can't go, and all of this. And yeah, although to be honest, if 1990, say 2 or 3, 89, if Ohio State couldn't play in the Michigan game, I don't know that I would have been so super upset about that.
Oh man, Tony, even 88 when at 4-6-1, man, that would have been the end of the world for me. That would have just, I lived for that game.
I would live for it as well until it was 28-0, and then I would go play football in the yard.
We only know what the social media reaction is. We can't go to bars. We can't do it.
It's true.
It's my signed Art Schleichter jersey.
I think that's a Tom Hoying.
Yes.
I think that's a Tom Hoying.
Definitely wait to the track.
Right in Tommy Hoying. I don't think people have really come to terms with it yet. I think that we're so caught up in the immediate news cycle that people have not had a chance to properly mourn the fact that we're not going to have the game. And it's probably going to take a couple of weeks. It's probably going to be until a couple of weeks after Ohio State's football season, whenever that may be, at whatever point that people realize that the game wasn't played. Ohio State social media account put out what the game trailer would have been. I saw some feels happen on social media at that point. But, we're so much, as Mark said, about the immediacy of, okay, well, what's next? What's the CFP? I mean, competing to beat Michigan, competing to win the league championship don't really mean as much these days. I definitely think that with it being a one-sided series, the way that it's been as of late, I don't think there are a lot of people out there that have never seen Ohio State loss, or if they've seen one, it was 2011, which was just obviously that weird transitional year or whatnot. So, You know what? I think that when we're on Ohio State Buckeyes, what is 120 or something like that, it'll be very different at that point when people have had a couple of months to let that marinate and realize that we were robbed of one of the greatest spectacles. One where Ohio State was a 30-point favorite, and I seriously was ready to put everything I owned and could get my hands on Ohio State to cover that easily.
I go back, obviously, 52 years old, grew up in Circleville, just south of Columbus. In the 70s, you only got 2 or 3 games a year on television. If they played Oklahoma, maybe in the non-conference, you'd get to see that, and maybe Purdue or Illinois or somebody at midseason. And then ABC always showed the Michigan game on noon, one of the last Saturdays in November, and you just knew that that's what you were looking forward to at the end of every season. And obviously, Tony mentioned the millennials have killed this. That's a good point. I think that what even my son and daughter, who are seniors now at Ohio State, my daughter finished her semester today and is now in her last semester as an Ohio State student. So happy for her, and sad at the same time that they didn't get to go to games this year and didn't get to go to this game in particular on Saturday, because these are the memories that you remember forever, these type things. I mean, I could sit here and quote you one Michigan game I attended after another. I've been to every one of them since 1993 1992, with the exception of the 2001 game when my daughter was going to be born a day or two later. I didn't get to go to Michigan for that. So that's like 27 of the last 28 or whatever that is, but in a few more before that. The thing is, what killed it wasn't the millennials. It was Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer killed it, and they killed it with their due diligence in making it a priority, recruiting the greatest players they could get their hands on, and then just going out and just beating the brakes off Michigan year after year after year. And Ohio State single-handedly has dismantled the Michigan football program. It is now an area of complete and utter despair. 2-4 this year, worst year obviously under Harbaugh, and this rivals that what was it, a 3-9 year that Rich Rod had one year. So this is as bad as it gets up there right now, and it's because of Ohio State. They don't get any players out of Ohio who are worth anything. Teams are going into Michigan and taking great players out of there. Ohio State doesn't have a lot of good or great Michigan players right now. They only got, I think, 3 on the roster. I looked last week for Michigan State week, but in years past they've had Mike Weber and the Golston and different guys up and down the line who were outstanding players. Michael Jordan was an All-American at Ohio State from Plymouth, Michigan, and so on and so forth. So Ohio State's gone in there and taken guys that Michigan probably wanted but couldn't get. And Harbaugh's recruited well enough. It's just it has not come together for them. And I think they have to they're talking about an extension for him. Ohio State fans are like, yes, give him a lifetime extension. Give him for 20 years past lifetime extension if you could, because he's Ohio State's best weapon right now. And you think about the last 2 games, 4 touchdown spreads, both of them. So the Buckeyes have just completely wiped them off the map, so to speak. And so, will this signal maybe something's going to change and turn back in their direction? This 1-year pause, I don't know. I can't imagine they're going to flip the schedule next year because of this, because everything's based on these schedules, non-conference and everything. So I think Ohio State just missed out on a chance to host Michigan, and it's going to go back to Michigan next year, and the schedules are just going to go on like they should have. But any rate, my 2 cents, sad, but I'm kind of beaten down to the point where, what's it really mean at this point?
You guys know I like to balance out these conversations. So before Tony goes, I will say this. Among non-Ohio State and Michigan fans, the narrative out there is that Ohio State kills Michigan every year. And they've won 15 of 16. Kevin outlined the 1 year between Tressel and Meyer. It still counts, but there's an asterisk there to a certain extent. Okay. If we were sitting here 2 years ago, same week, Michigan's a 4-point favorite. They had played a better season than Ohio State. They had the same record, but against common opponents, there was a reason they were 4-point favorite. They had played a better season. And other than 2015 blowout, couple blowouts against Rich Rod, even though Ohio State was on a long run at that point, prior to the last 2 meetings, they were competitive games on the field. Ohio State kept winning, but they were competitive games, other than a couple.
No, and they were favored as well. I believe Michigan has been in the last few years or so. We're wondering when will fans, really get to feel upset about it. And I think it's when the Big Ten confirms that there will be no schedule changes next year, and fans will realize that the Buckeyes will be going to Michigan in essentially back-to-back games and not getting that home game, and how unfair that will be is how they'll view it. So there'll be some anger there. Maybe they'll just skip right past remorse or anything like that. But I don't think Michigan has done that bad. 4 losses. That's what Jim Harbaugh averages. So I think people need to get off his back. He's had 3 or 4 or 5 losses every year at Michigan. This is an average year. Give the guy some credit. Yeah, extend him 5 years, 4 years, whatever. If it's a little bit of a pay cut, so be it. These are tough times. There's a good way to spin it, and just go from there. He's got things going well right now. They've won. They haven't lost in a couple of weeks, so now is the time, in my opinion. And they will be playing. They should be playing a Big Ten championship week, which they've never done before under Jim Harbaugh. So that's another feather in his cap.
And they won't have to play Florida in a bowl game more than likely, because Florida will be in a New Year's Six bowl game, and Michigan may be at, Jets Pizza or something. So, you got that going for you as well. And, Steve says that Michigan recruits well. If you look at the recruiting rankings, they sure do, but I don't know many programs out there that do less with more than Michigan under Jim Harbaugh. They have furnished a lot of good players to other college football teams that have transferred out for one reason or another. And, I'm not going to necessarily speculate on all of that, but, I think that the development up there certainly has not been up to snuff. And, maybe it's an indictment of the recruiting industry. Maybe we're just kind of overrating some of the guys that they're going after. Maybe they're just not maximizing, or something is just not going there, because I've looked at their roster and I understand that there have been, there's situations players get hurt, players opt out, whatever. But as I was going through writing a tale of the tape that really didn't have to run this week because the game didn't end up happening, I'm like, who are these guys? I felt like a scene from Major League with the groundskeepers just, saying, who are these guys? And it's followed up with a much more gutterific type of statement at the end of it. And that's kind of how I felt when I was looking through there. I was like, I Mazzie Smith, I recognize that name. Where's Cameron McGrone? Where's a Chase Winovich? Where's a Rashawn Gary? Oh, wait, there's not. I knew Daxton Hill. I bet you Daxton Hill's career would be going a lot different if he would have come to Columbus instead of going to Ann Arbor. But, it is what it is.
If you look at the Michigan recruiting, though, the top half is okay. It's the bottom half that ruins everything. That's where their depth is, and those guys end up having to play, and they're not that good, and they shouldn't be playing at Michigan, as evidenced by the quarterback they would have had to have started this week probably, and Dan Villari out of they stole him from, I think, Fordham or something like that. And so it's the energy that Jim Harbaugh used to have when it came to recruiting is gone, and he needs to get that back, because they are lazy recruiters in terms of, I keep saying, putting a fence around New England. That's never going to win you anything. That didn't win Boston College anything, even if they have lots.
Oh, that's hockey. Never mind.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so we're not talking the Frozen Four here. We're talking, football, American sports, not Canadian sports. And the sooner they stop being lazy and settling for their recruits, the better off they'll be. And, I thought Jim Harbaugh, when he arrived, one of the things he was going to do very, very well was develop players, and that's just not happened. Rashawn Gary, Michigan fans defend him to this day. I think the guy finished with like 8.5 or 10.5 sacks in his career, and they'll tell me that you don't just measure a defensive end by sacks. And it's like, well, when he goes to the NFL Combine and runs like a 4.57 and he's 280 pounds and he's 6'5", he should have 8.5, 10 sacks a year. And if they didn't use him that way, then it's an indictment of the coaches as well. So either way, your coaches stink at bringing the best out of players. Jabril Peppers, number one player in the country. He was okay, but he wasn't nearly as good as the media thought he was. I remember the year he won the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. In Big Ten play, Draymond Jones, Ohio State defensive tackle, had one more tackle than Jabril Peppers in Big Ten play over the course of 9 games. And that's a defensive tackle against a linebacker / safety who is meant to go and get the ball everywhere it goes. And so even that guy didn't get developed as well as he should. And yet people will tell you, well, they were both first-round picks. That's great. They would have been top 5 picks if they had gone somewhere else.
Think about all the interceptions, though.
You're right. Strike all of that from the record. That one interception on a tipped pass that Ohio State fans guaranteed were going to they crossed the football gods by ripping Jabril Peppers for never having an interception. And so, of course, he had an interception against the Buckeyes. It was fitting. It was justified. And it was easy to predict.
It looked like one of those deals where if you turn around, somebody throws you something real quick and you just kind of out of reaction just can't help it.
What's this doing here? I guess I'll catch it.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm on mute. Sorry, I was muted. The two I think about are the quarterback, Shea Patterson, was like a national top 10, 15 guy. You thought the quarterback whisperer was going to win big and put him in the NFL. He went undrafted, I believe. And then the other one, I've just called his profile appears, Donovan Peoples-Jones was the number 12 overall player in the country, the number 1 wide receiver the year that he came out of high school. And we were watching the Cleveland Browns the other day, and he made a big explosive play in the game for the Browns. And he really has only played since Odell Beckham Jr. got hurt last half of the season. And my son and I are sitting there watching it, and I said, didn't we get him in like the 5th, 6th, 7th round? And we looked it up. It was the 6th round. Donovan Peoples-Jones was the number 12 overall prospect in the country in the year that he came out, and he was drafted by the 3 years he was done in Michigan in the 6th round. Now it's turning out he may have a pretty good pro career, starting to scratch the surface a little bit as a rookie with the Browns and really coming up big for them. But just 2 examples where they'll take. I'm going to take your blue chip talent. I'm going to make sure you don't get drafted.
Well, Donovan Peoples-Jones, a guy that Kerry Combs risked life and limb to recruit through a blizzard, driving up there in Michigan, recruiting him, and never had a 100-yard game at Michigan, which is amazing to me. And then Shea Patterson just furthers my theory that the longer a quarterback is coached by Jim Harbaugh, the worse he gets. And now you're seeing it. It's happening quicker and quicker. Look at Joe Milton. Cade McNamara lasted 1 game before he was done. And so they need to go find a transfer, a 5th-year senior who has never – or maybe J.J. McCarthy, their 5-star guy that they're signing in December. Maybe as a true freshman, he will be outstanding, but then he'll gradually get worse and worse and worse. So maybe next year, lightning in a bottle for Michigan. 3 losses tops.
I don't know if it's gradual. I mean, he may be bad by the end of his first series or whatever. He may come out and throw a 20-yard rope and then sit there and just curl up in a fetal position by the last play of the drive.
McNamara had that big game against Rutgers in the overtime, and somebody on our message board went to the Michigan 24/7 message board and found a message that said, McNamara already has the look of Derek Carr or something like that. And they brought it over to our site with the caption, well, that didn't take long, did it? And of course, the next week he played like Stevie Carr. So, Wendell Carr.
Yeah. Austin Carr. It's just basically, or it's basically
an 80-year-old former NBA player.
Or it's pretty much any quarterback getting drafted by the New York Jets. Or I would have said the Cleveland Browns before Baker Mayfield. He might be. All right, guys. My question, I believe, for next week will be comparing the 2019 Buckeyes and the 2020 Buckeyes for as much as you've seen. But we'll save that one. And I think what would be appropriate for the predictions is that you give an Ohio State Michigan prediction, and then I will spend this week figuring out what the score would have been, and I'll let you know how close you guys were.
I wrote mine on Monday. I knew it was probably just going to be an exercise in futility. I always have a little bit more fun with the Michigan prediction. There's no part of that offense that worked. And I wasn't even basing this off of 20, 30, 40, however many guys were going to be out. But, some member of the insane clown posse was going to be their quarterback. They can't run the ball outside of Hassan Haskins. Ohio State doesn't give up rushing yardage. Michigan's secondary can't cover anybody. Ohio State's running game was starting to find it's finding its way as well. You had Ryan Day, who certainly said he wanted to hang 100 on them. You had players who said they wanted to beat the brakes off of them. I had 70-14. I'm not even kidding, and I wouldn't have been surprised if it would have been higher. But 70-14. I was thinking this could have approached 86-0 back in 1890, whatever, or 19-2. They were going to get somewhere pretty close to it. I thought that an Ohio State team that needed to get some points certainly had an axe to grind, and I really don't think that Ryan Day gives any you-know-whats about what Jim Harbaugh thinks about him.
Tone, what do you think?
I hadn't even given it any thought until just a couple of minutes ago as we started talking about this. I would probably lean to like 56-7, where Michigan gets a one sustained drive with the Hassan Haskins 35-yard run that they somehow then turn into points. But there is really nothing that Michigan could do defensively to stop Ohio State, because the run defense has gotten worse. The pass defense has been terrible. It's a shame we didn't get to see just how bad Ohio State could have made this Michigan defense look, because they can't do anything right now. And then offensively, all they can do is run a little bit, but not without they're not running with their third string quarterback. And so it's a godsend for Michigan that they did not have to play this week.
Oh man, I'm going to say like 61-10, something like that. Kevin, I wasn't going to say 60, but Kevin, going full 70 on us. 70? I'll say 61-10, maybe a missed extra point or a safety in there. God, who knows? But it would have been ugly. I think it would have definitely been ugly, and I don't think 30 would have been anywhere close in terms of the spread. So
first half spread?
Yeah, first half spread, yeah. Crazy.
I'm going to give Michigan a few points here. I'm going to go more 63-17, something in that range.
Hater.
Possible.
Yeah, I'm a hater. I'm a hater of everyone, as it turns out. All right.
The voice of college football. He hates your favorite
team. I get around to everyone at some point. Oh, my God.
You're in the chat, though. I hate your team.
Hey, just so people watch, I don't care what they think of me. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, Kevin Noon from Rivals Buckeye Grove. They do an amazing job. And again, I say this from time to time, and I just don't want to beat people over the head with a big sales pitch. But my goodness, if you guys don't understand what they bring here every week for an hour plus, and this will stay going based on your individual contributions. And if you can get us on the lead of a sponsor, which I say that knowing that that's possible because it's been done, and it gave birth to a Nebraska show of all things. So people step up, let us know what you can do. And again, you can contact me at MarkRogersTV at Gmail with a high of like 340 on the line today. So appreciate everybody jumping on board. And you guys, whatever your weekend holds, enjoy.
Thank you.
You too. Enjoy.